Hello everyone and welcome back to Crack Keys, and in today's video I'm again back with another history chapter, chapter number 1, the French Revolution. So let's get started with our chapter. So our chapter is the French Revolution, chapter number 1 of our history book, India at the Contemporary World, class 9th SST. So let's begin. On the morning of 14 July 1789, so there was a morning of 14 July 1789 at the city of Paris was in a state of alarm. The king had commanded troops to move into the city. Rumors spread that he would soon order the army to open fire upon the citizens. So, on 14 July 1789, there was a mess all around. There was a rumor spreading all over the France that the king had commanded troops to move into the city and open fire on the citizens. So, some 7,000 men and women gathered in front of the town hall and decided to form a people's militia, means military. They broke into a number of government buildings in search of arms. So they tried to find some arms, means weapons, guns, and other things in the government buildings, such as the warehouses of government. So finally, a group of several hundred people marched towards the eastern part of the city and stormed the fortress prison, the Bastille. So they marched towards the eastern part of the city and destroyed Bastille Fort, which was a prison where they hoped to find hoarded ammunition. So they thought we will get a lot of ammunition, but in the armed fight that followed, the commander of the Bastille was killed and the prisoners were released. Those there were only 7 of them, yet the Bastille was hated by all because it stood for the despotic power of the king. The fortress was demolished, its stone fragments were sold in the market to all those who wished to keep the sovereign of its destruction. So basically, what they did, they marched towards the eastern city and they destroyed a Bastille fort, which was also a prison. They hope that they will find hoarded ammunition. So in that armed fight that followed in the near the Bastille fort, the commander of the Bastille was killed and the prisoners were released. There were only 7 prisoners, but still they were released. Yet the Bastille was hated by all. So all of the people were hating Bastille because it was stood for the despotic power of the king, means high power of the king. So the fortress was demolished and its stone fragments, which was left after the fort was broken into the pieces, so that pieces were sold in the market, so that the ones who wants to keep the souvenir of destruction can get those pieces as that souvenir. So the days that followed saw more rioting both in Paris and the countryside. More people were protesting against the high price of bread. Much later, when historians looked back upon this time, they saw it as the beginning of a chain of events that ultimately led to the execution of the king in France. Though most people at the time did not anticipate this outcome, how and why did this happen? So that's what we are going to learn in this chapter. So here is a picture of storming of the Bastille. Uh, so soon after the demolition of the Bastille, artists made prints commemorating the event. So this chapter is divided into 5 parts. So in this video we will only study the first part, which is this French society during the late 18th century. So there were 3 estates. First estate was clergy, second was nobility, and third was peasants. 90% of them was peasant, and some were small peasants, landlords, landless labor, and servants. Some were big businessmen, merchants, court officials, and lawyers. So let's start from the starting. So in 1774, Louis XVI of the Bourbon family of kings ascended the throne of France. So Louis XVI ascended the throne in 1774. He was from the Bourbon family of kings. So he was 20 years old and married to the Austrian princess Marie Antoinette. So when he was ascended to the throne, he married Austrian princess Marie Antoinette. Upon his accession, the new king found an empty treasury. So when he was ascended to the throne, he found that the treasury of the France was empty because the long years of the war which was there before under the command of Louis XV. So long years of war had drained the financial resources of France. Added to this was the cost of maintaining an extravagant court at the immense palace of Versailles. So they wasn't having any treasury, as well as they were required to maintain an extravagant court at the immense palace of Versailles. Extravagant means a very big and expansive palace. So under Louis XVI, France helped the 13 American colonies to gain their independence. So he was a very person who were helping 13 American colonies, but uh, he was so busy in helping that he didn't found that the treasury was almost empty. So France helped the 13 American colonies to gain their independence from the common enemy, Britain. So actually at that point of time in 70s time, the Britain was the only power at that time, and almost whole world was under its control. And so France also was enemy of Britain. So France always tried to make Britain feel failure. So they helped those colonies, 13 American colonies, so that they can gain their independence from the enemy, their Britain. So they were having common enemy Britain, so that's why they did like that. So the war added more than a billion livres to our debt. So livres was their currency. So they the war made them a loan which was a billion livres to a debt that had already risen to more than 2 billion livres. So 2 billion livres was under the so 2 billion livres, they were having a loan of 2 billion livres and they were needed to pay that. So lenders who gave the state credit now began to charge 10% interest on loan. So now the lenders who lended them 2 billion livres started charging 10% interest on loans. So the French government was obliged to spend an increasing percentage of its budget on its interest payments alone. To meet these regular expenses such as the cost of maintaining an army, the court, running government offices or universities, the state was forced to increase taxes. And the main problem arises here. Yet even this measure would not have sufficed. French society in the 18th century was divided into three estates, and only members of the third estate paid taxes. So there was a system of three estates. First and the second estate was like they were not they were exempted from the taxes. Only the third estate ones, who were the poorer ones or who were falling into the third estate, were there was meant to pay taxes. So the society of estates was part of the feudal system that dated back to the Middle Ages. The term old regime is usually used to describe the society and institutions of France before 1789. So to describe this three estate thing, we gave it a name, old regime. Okay, so figure 2 shows how the system of estates and French society was organized. Peasants made up about 90% of the population, however, only a small number of them owned the land they cultivated. About 60% of the land was owned by nobles, the church, and the other richer members of the third estate. So basically, the clergies were the workers of the church, and nobles were the landowners, big landowners. So they were having a lot of land, which on which the peasant used to work. So the member of the first two estate, that is the clergy and nobility, enjoyed certain privileges to birth. So they were having privileges by birth. So the most important of these was exemption from paying taxes to the state. The nobles further enjoyed feudal privileges. These included feudal dues, which they extracted from the peasants. So then they can also put a tax on the peasants, that if you are there, so if you are working on the land, you need to pay tax. So these include so peasants were obliged to render services to the lord, to work in his house and fields, to serve in the army, or to participate in building roads. So the church too extracted its share of taxes called tithes. So the church was having a tax called tithes from peasants they were taking, and finally all the members of the third estate had to pay tax to the state. These included a direct tax called tile and a number of indirect taxes which were levied on articles of everyday consumption like salt, tobacco, and etc. The burden of financing activities of the state through taxes were borne by the third estate only. So here they want to say that these taxes were only borne for this what you call third estate person, not for the first and the second one. So they were mostly used to pay two most major taxes, taxes and tiling, and but there was so many indirect taxes other than that. So uh, this is a spider and a fly and uneven etching. So the nobleman, he is a nobleman and he is a peasant. So nobleman is a spider and the peasant is a fly. So he's a spider and he's a fly. So he's having this much gold and things, but still he's draining his all the econ- all the capital. The population of France rose from about 23 million in 1715 to 28 million in 1789. So the population also increased in these years by by almost 5 million. So this led to a rapid increase in the demand of food grains. So the food grains were in are very much demand. So the production of grains could not keep pace with the demand. So now the production of grains was not able to keep pace with the demand. So the price of bread was, which was the staple diet of the majority, rose rapidly. So the rate of the bread which they used to eat rose rapidly, and they were required to pay a very high amount for buying that bread. So uh, most workers were employed as laborers in the workshops whose owner fixed their wages, but wages did not keep pace with the rise in prices. So most of the workers were employed as laborers in workshops, and they were having a fixed amount of wages, but wages did not keep pace with the rise in the prices. So the gap between the poor and the rich widened, things became worse. Whenever drought or hail reduced the harvest, this led to a subsistence crisis, something that occurred frequently in France during the old regime. Now this occurred frequently in France because the only one estate was paying the taxes, so they were not having enough money to feed this much population. So how a subsistence crisis happens? So we are having a chart. So uh, bad harvest, the poor cannot no longer buy bread. So now disease epidemics. So that's all. So now let's get to the 1.3 part of the first chapter. A growing middle class in Vestiges and to privileges. So now they started protesting and thinking that whatever going on with them is not right, it should not be there. So let's study what they did. So in the past, peasants and workers had participated in revolts against increasing taxes and food scarcity, but they lacked the means and programs to carry out full-scale measures that would bring about a change in social and economic order. This was left to those groups within the third estate who had become prosperous and had access to education clinics. So basically, when the peasants and workers participated in the revolt against increased tax and food scarcity, so they lacked the means and programs to carry out full-scale measures. It's because they were not as much educated. But after some time, there was a change in the social and economic order. This was left to those groups within the third estate who had become prosperous and educated. Means the ones like we studied that there were some educated person also in that third estate, such as these big businessmen, merchants, court officials, lawyers, etc. So these were the educated guys who made these ones to a revolt. So the 18th century witnessed the emergence of social groups. So many social groups emerged in this century, 18th century, termed the middle class, who earned their wealth through an expanding overseas trade. As we have discussed earlier, there were only traders and big businessmen. So obviously they will earn their wealth from overseas trade and from the manufacture of goods such as woolen and silk textiles that were either exported or brought by the richer members of the society. In addition to merchants and manufacturers, the third estate included professions such as lawyers and administrative officials, as we learned before. So all of these were educated and believed that no group in society should be privileged by birth. Rather, a person's social position must depend on his merit. Means they think that they should not get privilege from the birth. They should get privilege only when they have the merit. So these idea envisaging a society based on freedom and equal laws and opportunities for all were put forward by philosophers such as John. So the philosophers started to do these that kinds of thing and help these people. So John Locke, Jean Jacques Rousseau, and two treatises of government. So in John Locke write a one book, two treatises of government. Locke sought to refute the doctrine of divine and absolute right. So here he meant to say that there should not be any divine rights to the monarch and absolute right of the monarch due to birth. Rousseau carried the idea forward, proposing a form of government based on social contract between people and their representatives. So uh, they he proposed a form of government which is having a social contract between people and their representatives. Means the people now can elect their representatives by their own in through voting, like we do together, like we uh, vote our prime minister in today's time and our chief ministers. So, in the spirit of laws, which was written by Montesquieu, proposed a division of power within the government. So he proposed a division of power, means the all the power should not be under the monarch rule. It should be under a legislative and executive and a judiciary. So this model of government was put into force in the USA after the 13 colonies declared their independence from Britain. So they had those 13 colonies to get their independence. So now they are thinking that if they are having this much independent rights, so why don't we have? So they started protesting for them, not just protesting, they started writing articles and printing these things in the newspapers. So the American Constitution and its guarantee of individual right was an important example of political thinkers in France, as I said before. So the ideas of these philosophers were discussed intensively in salons and coffee houses and spread among people through books and newspapers. So so many people started to discussing these intensively in saloons, coffee houses, and it was there all over the books, newspapers, and these were frequently read aloud in groups for the benefit of those who could not read and write. So they started to read these aloud in the groups of some people who were not able to read and write, such as some peasants were uneducated, so they cannot read. So they do like that to make them understand what's there going on in the country. The news that Louis XVI planned to impose further taxes to be able to meet the expense of the state generated anger and protests against the system of privileges. So now Louis XVI again planned to impose more taxes. So they generated anger in themselves and started protesting against the system of privileges. So so I think that's all for this chapter. Now, so this is a chapter, the French Revolution. It is divided into five parts. So we can also call them five chapters of this chapter number one. So today in this video we have completed our first part. So in the next video now we will complete our second part. So till then this video ends here. So now I will meet you in the next video. Till then, take care. Bye bye, guys. See you soon.